Which one's the best crypto asset? Well, Bitcoin's the best crypto asset. Okay. What's the second best? There is no second best. There is no second best crypto asset.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Why Bitcoin Show. I'm your host, Dale Warburton. It's a weekly podcast on why Bitcoin matters and what makes it completely different to all other cryptocurrencies. If you're interested in Bitcoin and you'd like to distill crypto fact from fiction, you've come to the right place.
Amy Taylor, welcome to the Why Bitcoin Show. It's a real pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you, Dale. Always a pleasure. Good to be here.
Super. It's nice chatting to, I guess, an expat too. So I want to unpack some of that stuff. But perhaps just start off, just for the sake of those who don't know necessarily who you are, what's your story? Like, who is Amy Taylor?
Who is Amy Taylor? Well, there's a lot of us. It's quite a common name. And I'm not the Amy Taylor behind amytaylor.com. There's an intriguing story.
What does she do? Sorry, incidentally, what does amytaylor.com do?
Weirdly, I've connected with her recently on Twitter, and I think she's a brilliant human and articulate and funny. I heard her on a Twitter space, but she is a high-class escort. That's how I believe I present her title.
Okay.
What she does. But go check her out. She's got a great website. She's extremely entertaining on Twitter.
Okay, good.
But weirdly, we ended up on a Twitter space together recently. And I was like, how random. And there weren't many people on it. So we started messaging each other. And it was hilarious. She goes, oh, well, when I retire, you can have my domain. I don't think you need to retire. She looks incredible.
Okay, sorry. So anyway, to a
random
side.
Tangent. There you go.
That was great.
Bonus trivia about Amy Taylors of the world. What's my story? So I'm English originally, if you can't tell by my accent. At the time of recording, England are playing the Matildas in the Women's World Cup semi-final this evening. I'm very conflicted because I'm also half Australian. So I was born in England, raised in the UK. I spent a few years of my childhood in Australia. My dad's an Aussie, got 2 passports, which is very handy when you want to travel. So I am an expat, but I guess not to the extent that you are, because I kind of did spend a lot of time through family connections and I had reasons to be here. But I got to my kind of late 30s and I'd done a lot of traveling and was ready to kind of have more of a base, or wanted to. And having visited the Gold Coast in Australia, I'd always been a fan of the ocean, excuse me, and wanted to be near the beach. So that was a pretty obvious choice. Once I visited, I was like, that's where I'm going to go. And because I had the passport, it was a very easy thing to do. So yeah, that's how I ended up here.
How long ago was that when you made your most recent shift to Oz?
When I relocated, that was beginning of 2017.
Okay.
So about 6.5 years ago. Oh my God.
Oh, wow.
Crazy how the time goes. But yeah, 6.5 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so the Matildas are playing tonight against the Lionesses, and you don't actually know which way you want to go. Like, have you got an inkling as to where the match is actually going to play out?
I think it could go to penalties. I think it's going to be tight. I am always England first, but there's no question that what the Matildas have done this World Cup is unreal. It's been very exciting. And up until today, I've 100% been behind them as my second team.
It's fair enough.
So tonight's hard, but I know exactly who I'll be going for in the final because one of them will be there, which is great.
Exactly. It's almost like you're hedging your bets. No, it's brilliant because the same will happen when I eventually become an Aussie citizen and there's the Rugby World Cup. Maybe it'll even be before then, but I'm always going to support the Springboks first. But, it's nice to know that the Aussies could also win, although I know that's not likely given what they've been doing of late. Anyway, sports aside, let's talk Bitcoin. Let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin. You've got a Bitcoin psychopath top on, which is... to the untrained eye, might just be like, what's wrong with this lady? But we know what that actually means.
I very rarely wear like anything with words or branding on. I normally just wear very plain stuff because I don't want to have to think about what I put on every day. So I tend to buy very plain clothes so I can just.
You're like Mark Zuckerberg, basically.
Yeah, it's totally that. It wasn't intentional, but I realized recently I was like, isn't that what Steve Jobs used to do as well? But it is. It's just I've got too much going on. I just need to put something on in the morning and not look awful. That or soccer shirts, which I started buying as a rebellion on my 40th birthday because I played as a child. And I was put off by the fact that my dancing teacher disapproved. And then I'd like as I've grown up, like, I really miss it. I should have kept playing. I should have. So when I got to my 40th, I was reflecting on my life. I was like, I'm just going to buy a load of soccer shirts. So I did. So if I'm not wearing plain t-shirts, it's occasionally a Bitcoin t-shirt, occasionally a soccer shirt.
There we go.
Again, random trivia that no one needs about me.
Look, I mean, we're learning a lot here, Amy. Eventually, we'll talk about your childhood and some of your deepest insecurities. I mean, isn't that what this is about?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, Bitcoin. When did you come into it? And like, what was your first experience of it? And how were you actually orange pilled?
Okay, so coming into it first and orange pilling were quite a long way apart, as I think a lot of people do. So my first introduction, hearing the word Bitcoin, would have been, I guess, mid to late 2017, when it was introduced to me, not as Bitcoin as we know it, as by Bitcoin self-custody, which is obviously the end point you want everyone to get to. It was one of these network marketing-y Ponzi type awful, I cringe thinking about it now, in 2017, in and amongst the ICO activity as well. And I'm guessing anyone listening to this is kind of a Bitcoiner, or at least has an understanding of what an ICO is. So it was a combination. It was this network marketing thing, and I still see them today. You can smell them a mile off now. But they also, within the company, were going to launch their own coin. But the thing that it was US iTech. I don't know if anyone would have remembered that. There's bound to be people out there who, but it was my first introduction to Bitcoin, because what they sold was what they called BTC packs. So you basically put cash in and they told you that you were getting Bitcoin. It's nothing different, I guess, nowadays to putting your money into earning, staking nonsense that doesn't make sense if you go as far down the rabbit hole as some of us are. And I always feel like you've got a superiority complex in saying that, like, I'm further down the rabbit hole. It's not. It's just that basically means you've experienced enough pain to not want to keep doing anything but Bitcoin, just to clarify. Because I think that,
no, it makes sense.
To the average person, that comes across as, oh, you're further down the rabbit hole, and people think we're somehow arrogant or superior. It's like, no, just trying to save you the pain that the rest of us have been through.
Yes. There's no easy lessons. They're all hard. We've all made them.
Have to learn their own. Yeah, for
okay,
sure.
So that was 2017, where some grifters said, give us some cash and you'll get a Bitcoin.
And invite all your friends and family. And
multi-level marketing.
Massively. But with no genuine value. Like I was in the affiliate marketing space, and I still am. And I massively believe affiliate marketing is a huge way for people to change their life. It's not network marketing. It's a skill set. Whereas network marketing is just purely about this product, and this product had no value in hindsight. But, the people that were first and got onto YouTube and some of the people looking back, just were so naive, but these people, their lives had changed and they were making a fortune. And then the whole house of cards just came crashing down when the bear market hit, all the ICOs started to collapse. I actually ended up working for a social media company they were trying to build a social media platform following the ICO craze. And that was another insight into the ridiculousness of just people putting money into thin air and founders taking money out of thin air on the other end. Because this company that was trying to build a platform, they had these flash offices, like they were trying to be the Facebook, and the owners and the founders were driving around in Teslas, but yet there was nothing really of substance being built. And there were 25 people employed that would subsequently all lose their jobs. And it was just a crazy, crazy time to look back on, because now, hopefully with a bit more critical thinking behind us, the average person will go, but what actually is this? And that's what I guess what I wish I'd done, both with the Ponzi scheme and with this job and with that whole experience before getting orange pilled. So I guess that's what would you call it? Before orange pilling, BOP, BOP, like BC. Bop. Before there's BOP, and there's what's post pop, BOP and pop, post orange pilling. I just come up with that.
So when did you actually get Bitcoin proper then? So that was obviously during the ICO craze, and I mean, I too at that point noticed it for the second time, and I was sort of quasi celebrating its demise as the bubble popped, because I thought finally this rat poison squared is dead. Sadly not. And little did I know, but what in your case, what was it actually that finally got you to look a little bit deeper and basically put in some work? Because I think I'm assuming, like most, it wasn't something that you had spent a huge amount of time on at that point.
No. So after 2018 hit, and I was holding a handful of altcoins, otherwise known as what everyone else calls them, shitcoins, whatever. I was just like, I've lost so much money. This is crazy. I don't know what I'm doing. And I just really abandoned ship. And it wasn't until, I think like a lot of people, beginning of 2020, before the world went crazy about everything, and social media and mainstream media just got so out of control. Everyone was angry. I was doing coaching in the small business space at the time, for marketing, and everyone was suffering. And I just wanted to curl up in my house and go to sleep because everyone was depressed and desperate and awful. It felt awful. And so I started researching investing in crypto again, because my mum had lost her husband. She'd also lost her mum, and the three of them were living under one roof up until 2017. And then over the course of the couple of years, helping her deal with selling her house, sorting out his estate, and sitting down with her basically and doing her finances, that she was going to be on the one pension. And like my world got flipped upside down, because I was like, until that point, she had no idea. And until we sat down together, it dawned on both of us that she was eventually going to run out of money and be financially reliant on me, because her pension's not enough to live, even with her roof over her head paid off.
Wow.
In the UK, and it would be similar here. So I was like, okay, well, at least we know about it now. And so we had like probably a 5-year runway before I was going to have to start helping her pay her bills, basically. And that's not someone who's been really financially negligent. That's just someone in the boomer generation who wasn't aware, And this is where I think our generation have got a chance to look ahead and go, we can see that it has happened, because we're no better off now than we were 5-10 years ago, and we've been working that long. Why does this keep happening? Why is life getting more expensive infinitely all the time, with no end in sight? So that was the realization I had whilst I was diving back into crypto as a whole. And I've got no shame in admitting that at that point I just went, well, it's all or nothing. We either run out of money in 5 years, or she does and I'm responsible, or I get on top of it and take the biggest risks I can responsibly and go for it. And at that point, I managed to stumble across one of the better influencers, I believe, and I still think he is, because people are going to go to crypto whether we like it or not. So I would still say, if you're going to do it, at least find some half decent influencers and not follow someone like BitBoy. And I put a significant amount of money in, but not, everything in the kitchen sink. And it was just, I guess, fortunate timing. It was mid 2020. And over the course of 18 months, I just watched that money grow. I absolutely did not sell the top, but I managed to learn a couple of ways to swing in and out and do okay. But it was a full-time job, because I literally stopped everything else I was doing. And I was in a position to give it literally my full-time attention and a few sleepless nights. Yes. So it was kind of this mixture for a long time of feeling, this is great. I feel so blessed to have found this opportunity. I'm so glad I'm learning about this stuff, because it wasn't just learning about the shit coins and trading and all the stuff. It was actually learning about technology and I've got a bit of technical knowledge or technological knowledge, actually just critically asking questions about, well, what is this project or this coin actually for? And it was that eventually got me to a point of, well, the more I'm learning about Bitcoin, the more it would appear that you can do that there. And I did a course. I have no shame in investing in, or no skepticism about paying for courses, because I'm a big believer in paying for information from people that are doing the thing and getting results. So I spent a few $100 on courses here and there, and calls with people, paying for their time to get some advice. And it just became very apparent that not everything has to be decentralized, but money definitely does. So I think anything in the financial space that some of these altcoins were claiming to do didn't make sense, because it was just replicating the fiat system, or a lot of sort of rehypothecating, if that's the word, and lending out, and
yeah,
not actually having the reserves of assets there, and all this kind of, even this language to me would have been 5 years ago alien.
yes.
But it's that whole, what is money, needing to understand the problem before you appreciate the solution. And then I lost, chunks of money. Thankfully, overall, I'd made enough to not be able to afford to lose it, but I was still positive, which a lot of people weren't. I had money in Luna, but thankfully got most of it out.
Wow.
Luna and UST, and I do think there are some projects that in the short term are intending to do a good thing, but yeah, it became harder and harder and harder to genuinely believe they were solving a problem or offering value. And when you look at that through when you look at things through that lens, rather than how much money can I make, screw the consequences or screw where it's coming from, it just got harder to feel okay with it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it was stressful, and it wasn't all of a sudden, it's like, God, I'm exhausted looking at my screen all day and worrying about it. And every coin would have a different wallet or a different way of doing things. And I'm like, hang on, this is a full-time job. That's not what I'm here for.
Yeah.
So once I got, clear on Bitcoin, and then comes the people, right? Then you start meeting Bitcoiners who start describing it through all these different lenses of what's good for the world. And you're like, oh, hang on a minute, I can really simplify my investing, but I can also keep it really simple that this is actually good for the world. And now I don't see how any of these are.
Yes, I think that makes perfect sense. And
you almost feel guilty.
Yeah. Well, I think your journey is like, it's very honest. And I think there's very few Bitcoiners who actually just went straight to Bitcoin and didn't sort of, dabble in shit coins at some point. I put my hand up. I bought Ethereum and all this other bullshit, not because I believed in it, just because I was greedy and I thought it would run hard. And it didn't. And I'm pissed. Yeah. After 4 months of holding it, I was just like, what is this bullshit? I know the game is to get as much Bitcoin as you can. I knew that from the beginning. And again, I thought I was smarter than the market. I can time it, I can play it. But yeah, it is very stressful if you're trying to also trade crypto, given its volatility. It's insane. But yeah, when I guess the one thing I would say with regards to kind of so-called crypto, and I like to use the way the Aussies describe projects, is that I honestly can't fathom that their intentions for 99% of the time are sincere, other than to enrich themselves and those who invested early. And I'm not talking about the retail investors. I'm talking about all the folks who enjoyed the pre-mine. I think there are certainly some delusional people out there. I think there's a ton of them. There's a shitload of people who live in a dream world and they're historically illiterate. They don't know anything about money, geography, history, finance, technology, and kind of what are some of the real problems we've got in the world. And, I think when I look at crypto as a whole, I tend to just dismiss it as kind of more of the same. There will be scams, there will be stupidity. And is there maybe like a layer, like a very thin layer of the 25,000 or 30,000 tokens that have some sort of product market fit, something that actually solves the problem? Like, maybe, because it shouldn't take like 2 weeks to send US dollars from South Africa to Australia, as an example. This is something I actually had happen fairly recently. And I was like, I hate Swift. It's an embarrassment. Like, what is going on? I'm not saying I want to use, UST, because that obviously depegged, that was a mess. But, USDC, that could happen pretty much instantaneously, and it would be a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
There's obviously a counterparty risk, and that's something that you can't sort of discount. And none of these stable coins even are, FDIC insured. So if they go bust, it's not like you can go to the government and say, hey, can I get some dollars for that? So there is that. I do acknowledge that. And stable coins are also potentially something that I think in Africa could be valuable. It's very hard for a South African to get hold of US dollars. Like, it's not easy. And if you've got an absolute shitcoin of a rand, you may want like USDC, even if it is.
I think there's more people on Earth that need that more than the average Westerner would even comprehend.
Absolutely.
Like South America and
So, I try to steel man crypto because it's very easy to just throw mud at them and pull a picture up of Do Kwon and Sam Bankman-Fried and go like, they're all just scammers and, the sort of anemic vegan Vitalik, like I can have such a laugh at these people because I think they're pitiful. Or Charles Hodgkinson from Cardano. I think he's probably up there with one of the worst. He has got a carbon footprint in the top 10 individuals in the world. And he cruises around the world preaching Cardano as if it's like somehow can be money that he's created, of course. And it's quite disheartening when I see sort of universities in South Africa, as an example, partnering up with the Elgarand Foundation to work on payments or whatever the fuck it might be. It's just like, unfortunately, there's just the blurring of the lines between crypto and Bitcoin. And then, I think typically what happens during these sort of bear markets, you could say we're in, is that the grifters kind of will leverage the Bitcoin brand to start sort of elevating this and go, yeah, Bitcoin's good, but also this. And then I guess when the tide shifts and then, crypto is back, then, we'll kick it to the side. It's almost like an abusive one-sided relationship where it's like, I'll get what I want from you when I need you, and then I'll just kick you to the curb. So I hate crypto.
I'm aware. And I think, Dale, but it's like everything. We kind of need all the voices and just trust that human beings en masse will eventually figure it out. And that's why I love what Elon's doing with Twitter. And yes, it's still centralized, but we're at where we're at. And I think it's important to remember what Saylor said about you want to be winners, you don't want to be martyrs, which is, there's no point all these passionate people who are willing to speak up and create podcasts and write newsletters or have websites and blogs and Twitter followings or whatever. There's no point if all of us martyr ourselves, right? And we have to just accept that I think we're in a very long-winded transition. So where I've tried to go with it, I mean, I was asking the question of anyone who was still slightly crypto leaning, am I safer putting my money that's cash or a stable coin in the bank or into a USDC or something like that? Because I don't know who to trust. Like if cash is what you need to ride out a bear market or a recession or whatever, which I think is smart, and even just to have cash for 6 months expenses in the event, that's the smart thing to do, is have an emergency fund.
Yes.
Well, where the F do you put it? If all this fear mongering from the Bitcoin maxis is the banks are going to collapse, it's like, well, that's not helpful, because it's far more dangerous, I think, to hold cash in your house or gold in your house.
That's not a practical solution. No, definitely not.
So what have we got?
I would say if you've got a large amount of cash, I think you need to just de-risk by having several bank accounts.
That's what I've done.
So that I guess that would be the first thing. Like, effectively, if one put all their trust, like a lot of the crypto bros do, in Circle, who underlies USDC, you're trusting them and their ability to back it with all sorts of instruments that you don't necessarily understand or know. The good thing about trusting a bank rather than them, I would say, is that
they've got consequences.
There is consequences. There are actually people that you could contact. There's also the reality that if a bank went bust here in Australia, you're insured up to 250,000. And that's in law. What I would be more concerned about, and this is actually something I've thought about, but I don't actually have the cash to make this a concern, is what if you had 5 million Aussie and you just wanted, and it was just part of your portfolio, could you get a serious haircut like the people in Cyprus did, in the event of like, oh, by the way, we're running out of money. Medicare is, really expensive. We're gonna just take 10% of all the rich people's money. It's not a big deal. Stop being greedy. Okay, we need to keep this afloat. luckily that's not my problem, NMP.
Mm.
But that's something that I've considered as being an issue. Yeah, and I think
that's why wealthy people buy real estate, and there comes the problem, right? That's what then makes a housing crisis. That's what then makes rent go up. That's why houses are being used as money, because it's what I don't think any person with that kind of money in cash would put it into any would keep it as cash.
No.
If I had 5 million in cash, I would probably put some of it in real estate, to be honest, because especially where I live, beachfront real estate is a premium. Like, again, you might ride out a little bit of volatility over the long term, but it's not going to be worse than the volatility of Bitcoin. So what I was getting at though, what I was getting at with this is that not just our generation in terms of age, but anyone who's in Bitcoin now and passionate about it and wants to see a better world that it can create, it's more just, let's just be sensible and acknowledge that we are living through a transition that could take a very long time. So, you know, I've buffered myself because I'm essentially restarting a business or getting active in my business again, because I just took a long sabbatical, basically. So I've got a combination of cash in different bank accounts and Bitcoin and all the things, and a business account and all, but it's like, but what are our options? So I think my take on that is we have a system, and that system will do everything it can to stay alive. And so if there are these laws in place, like you say, with the guarantee of up to 250 in Australia, I think it's the same in America, and I think in the UK it's £85,000.
Yeah.
It's all a gamble, but I just don't see them allowing those bank accounts to collapse, because you would have a civil war. Like,
I would agree. I would agree with that. The one thing to think about, the one thing that I've thought about, and like I totally agree with you. Rich people are not going to store their wealth in cash. They're going to invest it in assets that grow. Real estate's been good here in Australia. Something that I've been giving more thought to, though, is we have in Australia enjoyed a kind of exceptional run of economic growth by quantitative peopling. This was a term that I heard in the Great Australian Scream article that I absolutely love. I'll put it in the show notes if anyone's interested. It's absolutely brilliant. It talks about essentially like how simplistic Australia's economy is, that it's effectively it effectively runs on mining and bringing people in, and because the demographics otherwise don't stack up. And then education, that's also a really big part of it. But where I was going with this is we've enjoyed a really easy ride importing people and at the same time benefiting from China's growth. China has got a demographic problem. Their real estate bubble is slowly bursting. Their growth is slowing down. They're going to need less stuff from us, meaning our economy is going to get, our dollars are actually going to weaken. And so if you've got assets that are Aussie dollar denominated, what you might find is, if you measure by virtue of the world reserve currency, the USD, you're going to potentially see over the coming 24 months an exchange rate of about, potentially, sort of 50 cents to the US dollar. And we already see a downtrend, and that would mean a significant loss in your global purchasing power. Obviously, Bitcoin's immune to this. And it's something that I've thought about when I'm going, I've got my house. That is the main asset, Aussie dollar denominated, that has got that currency exchange risk. But otherwise, what you said earlier about kind of how people save in houses. I sent a friend a graph yesterday and just showed him from like 1970. I mean, who would have guessed? But just how, nominal wages and how they've grown relative to house prices. And you go, well, WTF happened in 1971, just sent him the website.
And I think a lot of Australians are naive to the fact that essentially what happens in America is going to happen here eventually.
No doubt.
Like, it just does.
Even the cultural stuff, even the cultural wars get imported. But I think I've said it before several times. The beautiful thing about Australia is that it's really insulated and late.
So and we produce a lot here that we need. Like I've one thing since the pandemic and seeing the chaos in supermarkets, and if you were in there seeing it play out before I sort of went in my rabbit hole and learned a bit more, it was genuinely scary to walk into a supermarket and think there's not much food here. Because people are panicking. There was if no one was going to starve, you just might not get what you want as a first choice. But I think the beautiful thing about Australia as well is that we do produce a lot of food here. So generally speaking, we're not at the mercy of our basic needs being cut off if China cuts us off. Whereas I think, although I was standing in Kmart the other day, I needed some candles, and I thought, I was going to Kmart, it's cheap. And I stood there and I was like, I'm here for cheap candles that have probably come from China. And I just stood there and I had this moment where it hit me. I was like, this entire store and the number of people in it, how popular it is. Everyone goes Kmart for everything, or Target. I was standing there thinking, how many people would lose their shit if Kmart disappeared?
Oh, yeah.
But the entire store is filled with stuff from China.
People are addicted to it. Yeah.
You don't need to understand Ray Dalio's Changing World Order. Or I get lost with a lot of macroeconomic stuff. I really do. But just in simple terms, next time you're in a shop like Kmart, find something in there that's not from China or Asia.
Yeah. No.
And how pissed off would you be if you suddenly had to pay 3 times more for your plates or your kitchen utensils or your cheap socks or your cheap undies? Like, people would go nuts if Kmart went out of business. But the reality is, well, if China turn around and say, you want all this stuff that we've been spending 30 years producing because we knew this would get to this point, because we're smart, we just solve problems and produce stuff that people want. Okay, well, if you want this stuff, you now have to start using our currency. It's that simple. You want this, you use this. You don't need to understand macroeconomics to get that, I don't think.
Yeah, and sort of the policymakers weren't incentivized to think like a business, which would be, look, we've got a supply chain risk here. They're just incentivized to keep people happy and keep, cost of living as low as possible and all these different things. So it wasn't even like, in the States, it was like, oh, we didn't even have masks. You know what I mean? Like, we have to ask our adversary, hey, excuse me, do you mind if I get a couple of masks for these folks? And by the way, they're porous and it doesn't even stop anything. But
it's ridiculous when we look. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, right?
Do you know what? I say this all the time, and it's like a little personal joke between my wife and I. But whenever like I see stuff from China, like I always and like especially like those artificial car fragrances and shit like that, which smell like so nice. I always make some sort of reference to Wuhan, so I'll go like, oh, it smells like Wuhan or made in Wuhan. But I don't know why. I can't actually, yeah. Okay, Amy, just away from Wuhan now. Let's so you mentioned a bit of toxicity in Bitcoin earlier, and I'd love to just uncover that, because I think you and I have previously chatted offline about some experiences you've had, I guess maybe early on in your journey. And then I think I also shared with you, like, yeah, I also, when I was sitting alone in the northern rivers, the beautiful northern rivers behind my laptop, furious because I couldn't go anywhere. Yeah. I too met a bunch of like just really like angry, 100% persuaded that it's their way or the highway. You're all a bunch of imbeciles and idiots. And I was like, yeah, no, like I'm not sure I'm on the vibe. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about like, your thoughts around toxicity. Is it a good thing in some ways? What are the pros and cons, or what's your view?
Are you talking about like toxic maximalism or just toxicity in the world in general?
Oh, no. Toxicity in the world, that's a whole podcast. Yeah.
Well, toxicity on the internet, definitely.
Yeah, no, because I think that's you can talk about social media and all that thing, but I'm talking specifically in Bitcoin, and I guess it manifests online, which is probably linked.
I honestly think though that they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, because I think the human condition at the moment is one in general across the board. Everything's subjective, and you can choose your attitude, you can choose a lot of things, you can. But I do think the human condition at the moment is one of struggle. There's statistics that from surveys, I work with Gallup a lot and I look at their reports. That is generally how people are feeling. Like happiness has declined, cost of living has gone up. Well, they're probably related. So I think all these petty squabbles that you've mentioned when we've talked before that the mainstream media has us focusing on, or attempts to through social media, has people generally pretty reactive or in not an optimal emotional state anyway. So it doesn't take much. And I think people latch on to anything that gives them a sense of belonging. And you can apply that to any topic that causes division right now, which is most things. And I was talking on my podcast to a girl called Emma, who was a coach of mine a while ago. It's just emotional manipulation, because if you put people into a state of confusion and then offer them certainty, they will latch onto it because it's just a human need to feel belonging. And I think that's what plays out in the crypto space as well. And that's why so many smart people fall for these projects, because it just takes someone to be a good speaker or a good marketer or a good influencer, not necessarily good in everyone's eyes, but enough to cause influence where people think this is the thing that's going to get me out of my struggle. Whereas if they weren't struggling in the first place so much and they were relatively balanced in their life because they could meet their basic needs like food on the table and their rent and their family and providing for their family comfortably, there wouldn't be a need to jump to this thing that's going to rescue them. Do you see what I mean? So I think the same thing is just playing out in crypto that is playing out in the world, whether it's the gender debate or red versus blue, or even in sport, you see the fanatics get, really, people are just clinging on to anything but looking at their own life and going, how do I sort myself out? And that's a lot of what my coaching brand is about. I'm slowly getting to incorporate Bitcoin without making it my focus, is, just try and switch off and sort yourself out. Because if 8 billion people just got to the bottom of their own shit and got their own life on track, we wouldn't have half these problems in the first place.
Totally agree. Clean your own room, as
make your bed. Yes.
Yeah, make your bed. And I love what you said there about, it's almost like there's people who are kind of lost in themselves and they need something to sort of latch onto, to feel something. Mm-hmm. And as you're describing this, I'm thinking of my best mate who never listens to my pods. I'm just like, dude. But during 2021, he was isolated, living in a small German village, now divorced, the poor bugger, and was so like angry and isolated, like, I can't do this, I can't do this, with the whole story. And what did he latch onto? NFTs. This was what he was going to do to get himself out of his struggle. He was in some debt, and he was like, this is going to solve my problems. He didn't listen to me about Bitcoin and all this other stuff, and did get some in the end, but it was that lifeline of like, and there were all these all these groups on Discord, and you're all part of the same team, and it's like, this is what's going to save us. But I think, just to dig a bit deeper on that, like when you've in the Bitcoin space, I suppose specifically, I tend to see people on like a spectrum, if you like, non-binary spectrum, where people go sort of from being very kind, toxic maximalists, the likes of, I actually put the Honey Badger in that category. I put Jeff Booth in that category. He's probably the kindest of all.
The spiritual ones.
Yeah. Lynn Alden is also very reasonable, like very open, rational, and like she can just like explain things so well. And it's the same with Jeff Booth. And then you get these people like right on the other end of it who are just sort of laser eyes, huddle cheese USA, and just screaming, shouting, telling everyone they're fucking imbeciles for anything that doesn't sort of align with eating only meat with salt and buying Bitcoin and whatever it is. And so it's like it's like almost cultish. And whenever I've sort of found myself belonging, I'm like, woohoo, I'm part of a team. And then it's like, oh no, you're becoming a cult. No, I don't like that. I actually like to think for myself. So how have you witnessed that and like in your journey along, talking to that kind of spectrum from the kind to the cult?
In Bitcoin, it's interesting. I'm always trying to draw parallels to real life, like for those who might be listening who aren't fully orange pilled or may never be. So I have coaches myself. I would never not have a coach when I am a coach. I think it's out of integrity to not be investing in yourself when that's kind of how I earn a living. I've got coaches, one in particular I'm thinking of, I'm not going to mention his name. And I sometimes watch him and I'm like, you're a freaking robot. And a lot of what he coaches on is managing your mental state, because he absolutely rightly says most people that don't succeed as entrepreneurs, and he specifically works with people who work for themselves and other coaches. And he says that is the only difference between people that get results consistently and quickly than those who don't, because they can't lift the emotional weight and they let their feelings dictate their decisions. And until recently, I didn't appreciate him enough, because when he's not working and he does the odd video on Instagram stories, he's in America, he's super funny, super animated. I think he's just announced that he's having a baby, and he's just nothing like he is when he's on coaching calls. And I'm like, that says it all. Like if all of us could get to a Lynn Alden space of energy, and even a Jeff Booth, and Breedlove's a bit like it as well. I'm quite an animated person, but I think when you're having a conversation with someone about something that is clearly divisive, or people get on the defensive because they don't understand it, there's a lot to be said for being quite extremely grounded and not being so animated and not being so charged, because it's threatening and it's intimidating to a lot of people. And I've really tried to take, apart from doing the work myself, and I have this coach in particular give me a spreadsheet, and it's like, this is a grief charge or a shame charge, or like deep stuff, and you literally, it takes a long time, which most people would never do, and it's hard work to give it the time, but literally going through a spreadsheet of, okay, what's the opposite of my view right now? What's the literal opposite if I looked at this from the opposite end of many spectrums of how I'm feeling? And when you start to do that, you see why the world is the way it is. And it's just this polarity of people think the certainty thing, they've got to have this or they've got to have this. And they're not willing to go, how do I feel and where on that spectrum am I going to sit? Because the whole spectrum is available. Go where you want. And what I love about the Bitcoin community is even a lot of the toxic maximalists will talk to another Bitcoiner and be able to apologize or come together in some way and be like, look, do you know what? Let's just agree. And Peter McCormack does a brilliant job of this on his podcast. And that's all I'm here for. It's the reason I've started a podcast. I'm like, as a coach, all I try and do with people is go, I can't deal with the people you're upset with. You're in front of me. Like, how can we get your mindset less charged and less polarized so that you can move forward with the thing you're here to learn? And
that's great.
I think that's just, I've done a lot of work on it myself to get myself managed. Like I doubted whether or not I wanted to go into coaching a few years ago, because I'm like, it's a full-time job just managing me. So it's just that it's and you can go super spiritual about this, and we can get into like the cosmos if you want, but everything is energy. We're made of energy, and we are batteries to a degree, and we will expire as humans. So it's just be discerning about where you want to spend that energy. And I think all the names we've mentioned do a really good job of just, they don't even expend energy having the conversation, because it's just, okay, well, this is how it is. And this is how
absolutely.
I feel. And it's like, oh, I feel so much more relaxed having conversations or even just listening to those people. Like, I'm quite empathic, and even just listening to someone get as animated as I do, I walk away from it going, oh, I'm exhausted. We don't need to feel like that. Like, life is hard enough without our conversations being so draining.
Totally. It definitely feels like a lot of people operate almost on like there's a default setting in their software that gets them to be like highly reactive. Like, I don't think they're acting with their cerebral cortex. They're thinking with their reptilian brain. It's like, I'm angry. Type. Whatever the case may be. And I think, it certainly doesn't help when it's all digital and you don't actually you don't get any of the actual body signals from people, where you can actually have a proper discussion. I mean, something, I can't remember the stat, maybe it's like 90% plus of communication is nonverbal.
Yep.
And if all you've got to do is like 140 characters or 280, or if you've got a blue check, you can write an essay, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just not conducive to real disagreements. And I do love that about the Bitcoin community, like from the recent trip to Palm Cove, we had a lot of chats, obviously after. I mean, the chats are what I go for. And, the diversity of views, and you're just listening, and people are like, this dude's talking about homeschooling. No, I don't agree with this. Then I start, ranting about this. Well, have you thought about this? I'm like, oh. And what I know with Bitcoin is that because it takes so much time to understand, if they've got a view that is quite strong on something different, my initial assumption is that you've done the work. If I probe, then I'll figure out if you're not. Whereas the inverse is true with ordinary people for the majority. Like, if I'm totally blunt, I'll assume you don't know what you're talking about until proven otherwise. And with respect, that's just kind of my default setting, because people just talk a lot of smack. Okay, next on the agenda that I want to discuss is you're the second female guest I've had.
Oh, wow.
Women are a small portion of my listeners, and this is something that I've triangulated with other podcasters to go like, what are your demographics like, particularly in the Bitcoin space? And then one looks at the whole landscape of who's who and who are the heavy hitters, and you've got there are some shining lights, the Lynn Aldens and Nat Brunell, etc., Elise Killeen, but generally speaking, I'd say it's like an 80-20 kind of thing. And I would just be, I don't know. No, in my podcast specifically, it's about 10 to 15% on average.
Wow.
I guess the interesting thing for me is just what is it about the fact that there are just so many guys in Bitcoin relative to women, just from your perspective? What's your kind of take on the whole issue?
I think so. When you say women in Bitcoin, the first thing I think of is Natalie Brunell's gathering that she's been doing, I think twice now at the she may have done it for longer, forgive me if she ever hears that, but at the Bitcoin conference. And I think there are a lot of women in Bitcoin that we don't know about, because they're in the development side of things, or the stuff that doesn't involve creating content necessarily. So I think there are a lot of women in the industry that we don't necessarily know about. I just don't think there's many that are creating content and putting their face out there.
Yeah,
that's definitely the case in my experience. And it would be a huge assumption to question why it's mostly male. But I honestly think it's just the transition, or not the transition so much, but the traditional roles, is that I think we're still in a very slow cultural move where women take more ownership of money or ownership of their finances, which might be an incorrect assumption. But I think generally speaking, it is still a slow educational process to the point where women do take more of an interest and time. I think generally men are more driven to take an interest in money because it's fundamentally, not for all, but for generally speaking, it's part of their makeup to be the provider. And even if they're not the main breadwinner in a household, it's just part of their makeup, I think, for a lot of men. That's the only sort of macro assumption I would make. Women in households, again, generally speaking, might be raising children. It's just, I just don't have the time to learn this stuff, or it's over my head, or this is stuff I've heard from people. And that's why I think it's important that, and I'm always sort of geeing people up if they've got any interest whatsoever in creating something of their own, and they're into Bitcoin or they're not into Bitcoin, just start talking about it, because there could be the one random thing that you say or one random comment you make that does hit that audience or that person, that gives you a new angle. I don't know. That's just the assumption I'm making.
It's reasonable. I think it's reasonable, though. All those assumptions are reasonable. I mean, I always, one needs to be able to have like a framework and based on assumptions. Otherwise, you're just not going to operate in the world. So those assumptions, for the most part, I think are pretty accurate. Particularly the fact that women generally, traditionally have occupied the role of nurturer, etc., and guys have taken sort of the lead on finances. Even today, whether they're sort of breadwinner or not, I've just found in my discussions, for the most part, it's guys who tend to be more interested in the money side of things. I've even got a friend who is the breadwinner in its entirety. And but the dude just, he controls the purse strings in a way, and not in like a you're not allowed to buy this or that or a manipulative sense, but in a sense of like she sort of has delegated that to him. It's in his portfolio, and it's like he knows what he's doing in that sense.
Yeah.
I think the exciting thing when I think about Bitcoin is obviously the fact that it actually can give property ownership to people that were never able to own a thing. So I think of, if you're in Afghanistan and you're a woman, I think rules are perhaps relaxing in a lot of the Arab world, but you couldn't own property, you couldn't inherit things, for example, and you certainly had no control over your own money. Wouldn't it be wonderful if there was this thing that you could just have on a smartphone and have 12 words in your head, where you could have at least some sort of ownership of something that no one else can take? So I think that is quite powerful. How that actually gets adopted in practice is another story. And, not something that people like you and I can do necessarily from here. But
I disagree. I think all it comes down to is meeting people where they're at and sharing your own experience. So for me at the moment, like I'm a millennial, or an older millennial, I suppose I'm at the older end of the millennial block of age group. And this is, I guess, partly me looking at it from a marketing perspective. It's like, what's the problem that people are struggling with, and how is Bitcoin the solution? And when I look around, there is no problem that isn't solved by it, because everything is downstream of the broken money, which we've all said those words many times. But people can't join the dots unless you apply it to something that affects them. And so, I mean, one for me is the amount of people that are now divorcing or single. And the way the system is set up, especially when there's children involved, is chronically unfair and doesn't offer. And I mean, we're going through it personally. My partner is separated. Things have been pretty tumultuous. There was a financial settlement, and whether my opinion is agreed with anyone out there or not is irrelevant. But we've been through the child support system, and there is absolutely no incentive for some people that are on the receiving end of government benefit or child support. There's absolutely no incentive to work. And raising a child is very labor intensive. I get that. But, the amount of entitlement that then breeds is not good. And when you have this lens on, you do start to wonder if it is a big conspiracy, because it keeps one or both parties having to work, having to pay taxes, because it puts them in a situation where if they don't, they're going to bleed money. And I don't know. There's no good comes of the traditional system handling your business when it comes to money. And so that's one example, is divorce, family breakdown, child support, all the little intricacies that go with that. Mortgages and banks and the way the interest system in that bubble of conversation operates doesn't work because of broken money. So I've told this story a few times about my neighbor who's a plumber. He's got his own business. He's done everything right. They bought their house. They paid the majority of their mortgage off. They've got 2 children, aged 6 and 4. Standing outside the other day having a chat, got into Bitcoin. He didn't really understand it, doesn't want to talk about money because he hates it, because it's the source of all his stress, because his business, his margins have gone down in his business. So people don't even want to talk about it because it's the root of all evil, or it's the root of all their stress. So that's a problem. And I was like, well, tell me more. And so he said, they'd sat down with their mortgage advisor or their planner a couple of years ago, and they were on track to be clear of the mortgage in 5 years' time. Rates go up, interest goes up, and they're now looking at 14 years. And I'm like, that system, however screwed up it is, and even if you don't understand the intricacies, the fact that someone can be put in that position. His plan was to be not out of his business, but significantly scaled down when his kids started high school. And so to me, all I heard was they've just stolen 14 years or an extra 10 years from him with his children. That's not okay. Okay, I don't care if you understand how Bitcoin works and how it fixes that or not. Start learning, because that is affecting you. That's not okay. So you should care about money, because that's your life. That's your children's lives, and that's your life with your children. Like, if that doesn't sink in for someone and they still don't want to learn about money, that's their choice. I've offered, like it's,
it makes sense.
What are your problems that I can, like, and Jake Woodhouse and I were talking about this as well. It is literally that. It's like, what is the biggest problem in your life right now? How can I help? Okay. and trying to get to that.
Yeah.
For some people our age, it might be, I don't think I'm ever going to buy a house. Why? Well, because I can't save quick enough to keep up with the rising prices. Oh, okay, great. Let's talk about that. Why is that happening? So you've got to just find your in and then be able to have an uncharged, unthreatening conversation about it so that they don't feel like they're being made wrong or stupid.
Yes. It can be quite challenging, I'm sure, because when you're describing the story of your neighbor, and this is just me because maybe I just have this sort of brain, I'm thinking to myself, you didn't put down enough money. You did not prepare yourself adequately for what was inevitable, that rates would go up. I mean, you can't stay at 2% forever. I mean, that's obvious
People
to
don't
me.
know that, though.
And yeah, but like to me, I go, personal responsibility. Like, you want to take out a shitload of debt? Why don't you just figure out what the risks are? Like, maybe you can say like, hey, I didn't know, I couldn't have foreseen it. The mortgage broker sold me this. The bank said I was fine. It's like, well, to me, and it's sort of my ethos. It's like, it's all on you, because
it is. What you've just said is an example of what I've been guilty of in my marketing coaching, which is the further you get down the further up you go on a learning curve, the easier it is to forget where someone's starting and how little they know. And it's all mindset. It's all mindset conditioning and how we think, right? So someone who's not even touched Bitcoin, ultimately, I agree with you. I think everything is personal responsibility. No matter how much you thought you were doing the right thing or not, you did it. You made the choice. You did the best with what you knew at the time. And for someone like him and the average person, I think they're just doing what they think is the right thing for themselves, their family, their future. And the only good thing that I've learned came out of the 2008 recession in the US, and I learned this from someone on Twitter, is that there's something now where if you take out a mortgage in the US, your interest rate stays the same for the life of the mortgage. I don't know if that's fact.
It is true.
The person who commented to me said that there's an option to do that.
You can just fix your rates. And so people now can't move because if they wanted to sell and move up, they would have to be locked in at basically double interest rate. So they rather go, no, I'm happy with the 2%. Thanks very much. And who wouldn't be, right? I mean, but yeah, like ultimately it's interesting because I agree with your approach in the sense of coaching, because it's not going to, like, the tough love, hey man, you should have actually just foreseen this, you should have got, done XYZ. What's done is done, and it certainly doesn't help the person move forward.
No.
When I think back to all the mistakes I've made, and I can't even name all of them, there's so many. When I reflect on them today, I kind of go, these are all the things that have made me who I am today. But
absolutely,
it's only because I've really gone down the introspection path, like really deep, like and looked inward and gone, what are these things that I've done? What are the patterns that have emerged? Giving up too soon or whatever it might be, and then tackling that head on. Unfortunately, I don't have a very optimistic view of most people's capacity to do that. And to the example you referred to earlier with people who don't have an incentive to work, like, to me, I don't know how to do that, but well, it's not as if I'm a workaholic, but I have to plow my energy in something I care about, one way or another. And I know, my brother-in-law's sister, she's just cruises around on the dole, like in a van, and sort of looks at rich people as with their ill-gotten gains.
They're the problem.
To me, it's just like there's a bunch of steps there that's just missing. It's like, how does one actually get the freebies in the first place? You need people to work. Does that not then compute in your mind to go like, what if everyone did this?
That's a big one.
Have you read a book?
A huge question.
Like, it's obvious. It's so obvious. Imagine if everyone had your attitude. There's no incentive to work. Hello, socialism, And so I think, but it's not like we're disagreeing per se. It's like I've come from it just from I've had the hard learnings, and I've looked deep into these issues. Whereas I think the majority of people don't have the time or the inclination, and the way the system is set up for many people today, I agree, is it's not conducive to human flourishing. You know, housing, which is something you really just want to be able to do and buy a home, so you don't have to feel like you have to move.
Yeah.
This is now my 7th home in 5 years, and we bought it. Okay. So thank God I don't have to move again for a long time, hopefully. But it's stressful. It sucks. You're at the whims of somebody else. And, you know, literally from 1970, people started using it as a savings mechanism.
Yeah.
And we see in Australia, instead of it going from like 3 years wages, a price income ratio of 3, this sort of balloons up to like 10 or 11 in various parts of the country. I mean, I don't know how one does this. And like, to me, Bitcoin is hope in that sense, to go like, okay, well, it's the best thing we have at our disposal as young people who can't buy these other assets at the prices our parents and etc. people before us did. So this is what makes me love the space so much, because I go, it's not just, hey, I'd love to have fuck you money, because wouldn't that be nice too? But it's also like, this is what I can do to elevate myself, and then I can help I can self-actualize and do what I really want to do without having to do things that I don't. And to me, that typically involves helping people, or I've said this a few times, but I want to like buy a game farm one day.
You did. You said that to me when we did my podcast, and I had stopped recording, and I was gutted.
I've got a vision of it, Amy.
Well, tell me again, because it is. I think more people need to hear it, because it's so much bigger than fuck you money or Bitcoin. It's, you know, it's genuinely a passion. Like, just flipping the tables a bit.
I mean, the long and the short of it is that the only way that wildlife in Africa is going to be preserved is through the private sector, and you need people who are prepared to invest. And there's always going to be that risk of expropriation by the government. So I want to invest in a place where, hey, you're not going to just come around and just steal my property. That'd be the first thing. But ideally, you want a situation where you can have just pristine wilderness with these magnificent animals cruising around in a natural ecosystem without fences and doing their thing. And you can go and spend time there. You can bring people there. And, you know, it's almost the guy kind of inspired me was this Norwegian billionaire, this oil billionaire who bought a whole bunch of the Amazon rainforest and just said, I'm not doing anything. You know, he could have done logging and all sorts of other commercial ventures. But anyway, it doesn't make me like a very like nice person or like a special person. It's just like, that's what I care a lot about. And in doing so, you're going to have to work with the community, because guess what? There's always a guy who's going to want to kill a rhino and chop off its face while it's screaming for $100. So how do you work with the surrounding area and uplift them so that all those people go like, hey, this is our stuff too, and we care? Because right now, all I want to do is I want to kill it, rip its face off, and sell it to some guy, or you know, snare all the buck or whatever. So
there's your entry point, right? Like, anyone who was to ask you, well, how does that relate to Bitcoin? It's not just that you want the fuck you money. It's asking the question, why is there someone who feels the need to do that for $100? What's his situation? You tell me. Like, what's the situation? Right.
Kleptocracy.
So it's the root cause, right? The money or the broken money is the root cause of why you feel the need to step in and do that. You need fuck you money to fix the problem of the impoverished. And that's the world we live in. It's like, you've got to be up here or you've got to be down there. Be really, really super rich, or just be flat broke so that the system takes care of you to keep you off the street. Is that really the world we want to live in? That's a hell of a waste of a lot of human energy that could be doing other things.
Absolutely. It's terribly sad, but this isn't about me. Sorry.
But I think it's a perfect story because, you know, I'm at a point in my life where I'm just happy to like maybe have babies and carry on my business. But that's kind of, I used to feel, you know, I've got other aspirations beyond that I assume will be longer. I would love to start a chain of schools that's like a hybrid of online learning and homeschooling with hubs around the world so that people could travel and pick up the curriculum wherever they go. Like, I don't know how the hell that looks, but you know what?
That's a no-brainer.
I can't make that work right now. I can't design that right now. I need to worry about me. which is what my brand is all about. So I need to kind of walk my talk. But a few years ago, when I was traveling around the world and I went to South Africa, wouldn't have known half of that. You hear a bit about the rhinos and the other species that are endangered, but I used to get so fired up about every problem in the world and upset and emotional, genuinely. And I think it's just realizing that, well, I'm probably going to be in a better position to do a lot about the things that I can narrow it down to caring about, which at this point in time would be schooling. And if I have children, I guess that would make more sense for me to focus on that as a solution I would like to provide. I'm going to be able to do a lot more about that with resources, with money.
Yes.
And I think that's what just people that aren't willing to have these conversations don't realize. It's like,
I can see your business, Amy. I can see
you can't help people if you're broke.
Totally. But what's going to happen in the next 10, 15 years is you're going to find smaller jurisdictions around the world are going to want to try and split out because these nation states are bloated, exhausted, they're running out of resources. Small little pockets of freedom are going to pop up, and people are going to say low, and they really are, but they're going to go like low taxation, freedom, etc., etc. Right? Here's the list of values. And they'll be trying to attract entrepreneurs, top talent, the smartest people, and people who just share those kind of values. And those people have babies, and they're going to need to be schooled. And so when I talk about, like, I think about my future, I go, okay, I want to go live in the bush for a year. How am I going to do that with babies? Okay, because that's also on my to-do list. So then you're like, well, no, we'll just go to Amy's sort of educational school. And then it's like, we're going to go live in Mallorca. Okay, how are we going to do that? The Amy educational
and then they're getting experiences, and then they're being exposed. My last episode of my pod was about homeschooling, and one of the examples she gave, it was Dr. Claire, I call her Clara, but hippie mom.
Yes,
she was saying, you know, one of the things she learned when she started looking into homeschooling or studying it as a professor to write about was, you know, she wanted to know how kids turned out that were unschooled or homeschooled. They're kind of in the same bucket, but unschooling is basically just doing the opposite and letting them do whatever they want. And the benefit was, there was this one kid example case study that she read where this girl desperately as a child wanted to be a vet. And so her family were like, okay, we'll go and live on a farm so that you can shadow a vet. And very quickly, this child at 12 was like, I don't want to be a vet. You only work with sick animals. I thought I'd just get to work with cute, cuddly animals all the time. And it's actually, they're sick and dying. And I, you know, so what a brilliant reality check to get at 12, rather than, I think Claire was saying it in the US, it would be age 26, couple of $100,000 in debt before having the realization at 26 that I actually don't want to do this. Okay, now what? I'm also trying to have babies or get married, and you know, all these other things are coming up, and you've just realized that this is not the career you want to be in, and you've got a crap load of debt. Like, there's a benefit of homeschooling or some sort of schooling experience that gives kids the opportunity to go, oh, in reality, not sure I want to work on Dale's game reserve because that's quite upsetting seeing the poachers. Maybe I won't do that. Maybe I will go to Mallorca and learn to sail. You know?
Yeah, totally. No, that's brilliant. That's actually, you know, I won't go into another one of my stories. I'll tell you offline about.
Okay.
I did a job shadow. It was very helpful. No, I love it, Amy. I can totally see that future, and I do agree with you that in kind of summation is like, get your own house in order. If you want to change the world, start within. Like, get your shit together, and you will be better equipped to help those around you. And what I also like to say to people is, don't just look at the world's problems and go, oh my God, I don't know where to start. You know, it's like an elephant, you know, and start with little pieces if you're going to eat an elephant, and just try and like make a positive impact to the people around you in your immediate vicinity. And it will kind of like fungus spread, you know, in goodwill. So in that sense, like, I try to look after the people in my life, and I tell them all the time how much I love them and they're fantastic, and do whatever I can. I try and push Bitcoin, but unsuccessful for the most part thus far. But yeah, I think
attract.
Yeah. Yes. So the last thing I wanted to just touch on was, okay, you got a podcast, and I think you've spoken about it here and there. Why don't you just give us a little sort of high level overview as to your podcast? if I may say, just shill it and tell us what we can expect if we tuned in.
All sorts. I'm 11 episodes in, so I kind of got to a point where I was procrastinating over starting it for a long time, like everybody does with many things. And I was like, well, I want it to be about how the hell do we just help people get happier? Because that's kind of the foundation of the coaching space I'm in. And I trained with Gallup, who are a strengths assessment modality. At least Clifton Strengths is. And Gallup are the organization that do the polls, and they survey people all the time around the world, millions of people. And they released a book which basically said happiness has been on the decline for at least a couple of decades. And I was like, that's not okay. Let's talk about anything and everything that is relevant to addressing that in the world that's relevant now. Because schooling being one, these systems that we're living with, Bitcoin being another, is just archaic. So what can we talk about that actually helps people survive better in the modern world that we're living in now? And so for me, that was part of my brand. It was like, well, be you, get paid, get your own house in order, dive into things that are going to help you address your biggest problems so that you can be happier, so you can provide better for your family in a way that means you also get to live your life and be happy and freer. We live in a world that's primarily online. There's endless opportunities to make money, where you can have freedom of location, freedom of schedule, which I think those two things alone would make people a lot happier. But it's going to be work up front. You've got to put the work in up front, a year, a couple of years. But the Bitcoin angle for me was, I guess, time horizons. It's like, what does your future happiness look like 5 years out from now, 10 years out from now, if you don't change anything? Even if you don't buy Bitcoin, but if money is usually time and money are the two things that most people want. So I'm really just having conversations with Bitcoiners, but trying to talk about other things that's relevant to the average person, so that when the Bitcoin conversation comes in, it just makes a bit more sense, or at least raises more intrigue.
Yes.
So it's to begin with, I was just like plucking anything that I've found useful. So people that I've worked with for coaching, clients that have worked with me for coaching, who have gone on to create something that's freed them up. Vicky, episode 2, she's a fertility and womb healing specialist. And I went through a miscarriage. So I spoke to her because I'm like, that's quite common for people my age. That's useful. I was just trying to speak to anyone who might be useful to people in my demographic. I kind of refined it now to Bitcoiners, just because we can still start with those different topics and then drop Bitcoin in at the end. So that's a very long-winded answer. But I guess
that's good.
I'm trying not to be a Bitcoin-focused podcast first, because I think there's plenty of those. We can always do with more. Every person becoming orange pilled is valid and worthwhile. But so yeah, I'm still refining it, but that's a very long-winded overview.
And that's great.
But there's information on my website that people can read a short version.
I will include links to everything, all your work there. Yeah, Amy, this has been really cool. I've had a great chat, and I love all the little tangents we went on. Like,
so many.
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely ditto. Hey, I know. Yeah. Well, super. Yeah, really good chatting, and thanks so much for coming on the show. And I hope to see you in person not too long from now, because you aren't too far away. Okay.
No, for sure. I will let you know if I'm in Brisbane.
Okay, superb. Cheers, then. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and that you got some value out of it. Either way, hit me up on Twitter and let me know what you think. My handle is Dale21M. If you've got any suggestions as to people you think I should be talking to or topics I should address too, I would love that sort of feedback. Otherwise, if you want to support the show, there's a couple different ways you can do that. The first is just to share it amongst your friends and family. The more that people hear the message that Bitcoin and crypto are not the same thing, the better. And I want to help people understand that. The second thing you can do is give me a 5-star review on whichever podcast app you're using. Of course, that's only if I deserve it. And last but not least, if you want to stream sats my way via the Fountain app, I'm not going to say no, but it's not expected. Thank you so much for your support thus far. It means the world to me. I appreciate the hell out of you, and the best is yet to come. Much love, friends. I'll see you on the other side.